Part 1. Introduction to Organizational Carbon Footprint. What is carbon footprint? Carbon footprint corresponds to the whole amount of greenhouse gases, GHG, produced, directly and indirectly, support a person's lifestyle and activities. The GHGs whose sum results in a carbon footprint can come from the production and consumption of fossil fuels, food, manufactured goods, materials, roads, or transportation. And despite its importance, carbon footprints are difficult to calculate exactly due to poor knowledge and short data regarding the complex interactions between contributing processes, including the influence of natural processes that store or release carbon dioxide. According to WHO, a carbon footprint is a measure of the impact your activities have on the amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, produced through the burning of fossil fuels and is expressed as a weight of CO2 emissions produced in tons. Next is effect of carbon footprint. The ultimate effect of large carbon footprints is climate change. Greenhouse gases, whether natural or human-produced, contribute to the warming of the planet. From 1990 to 2005, carbon dioxide emissions increased by 31%. By 2008, the emissions had contributed to a 35% increase in radiative warming, or a shift in Earth's energy balance toward warming, over 1990 levels. The decade from 2000 to 2009 was the warmest decade on record worldwide, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Climate Change Indicators Report. Next effect is depletion of resources. Carbon footprints deplete resources on large and small scales, from a country's deforestation activities to one home's increased use of air conditioning. The more those with large carbon footprints use resources, the more greenhouse gases increase and spur further climate change. Reducing emissions as much as possible and offsetting the remaining emissions by planting trees, for example, or supporting alternative energy efforts, will help to reduce the negative effects of carbon footprints. Now let's take a look on the components of carbon footprint. Greenhouse gases trap heat and make the planet warmer. Human activities are responsible for almost all the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over the last 150 years. The largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from human activities are from burning fossil fuels for electricity, heat, and transportation. What has been measured in carbon footprint? Carbon footprints are usually measured in equivalent tons of CO2 during the period of a year, and they can be associated with an individual, an organization, a product, or an event, among others. The carbon footprint is a very important means to understand the impact of a person's behavior on global warming. This is why someone who effectively wants to contribute to stopping global warming, at least on an individual scale, needs to measure and keep track of their personal carbon footprint. A carbon footprint includes direct emissions, such as from driving a car, as well as whatever emissions are required to consume any goods and services. Often, a carbon footprint includes the measure of other greenhouse gas emissions as well. A large carbon footprint has detrimental effects on the environment. Next, we're going to see what is organizational carbon footprint. An organizational carbon footprint is an essential component on the journey toward net zero and is the first building block towards any sustainability strategy. A carbon footprint can also provide an initial climate risk and opportunities assessment by identifying emissions hotspots across your value chain. Companies all over the world measure and report their carbon footprint to their stakeholders and use the findings to inform their sustainability actions. However, if you are at the beginning of your journey, you likely have some questions about how to kick off the process. Questions like, what information do we need to go for organizational carbon footprint measurement? First of all, the essential data required for carbon footprint include energy, gas, and water. Facilities or energy teams usually hold this information, but the finance department will also have access to this through invoices. Business travel, which this includes staff travel and commuting. Air travel information can be collected from your travel agent or the team responsible for booking travel, whilst employee commuting can be calculated through a staff survey. Organizational carbon footprint is the process of measuring and reducing carbon dioxide, CO2, and other greenhouse gas emissions related to your operations, including your supply chain. The benefits of carbon footprint management are lower operating cost, meet customer demands, improve brand perception, respond to investor pressure and comply with regulations. Summary for introduction. A carbon footprint corresponds to the whole amount of greenhouse gases, GHG, produced to, directly and indirectly, support a person's lifestyle and activities. Climate change and depletion of resources are the significant effects on carbon footprint. There are 10 major components of carbon footprint: water, emissions, electricity, transport, offsets, waste, fuel, personnel, gas, and recycling. Carbon footprints are usually measured in equivalent tons of CO2 during the period of a year, and they can be associated with an individual, an organization, a product, or an event, among others. An organizational carbon footprint is an essential component on the journey toward net zero and is the first building block towards any sustainability strategy.
We have learned what is carbon footprint and what is an organizational carbon footprint. Now let's have a little quiz on this part. First question. The definition of a carbon footprint given by WHO is a measure of the impact of activities on the amount of CO2 produced through the burning of fossil fuels expressed as the weight of CO2 emissions produced in tons. True or false? Correct. The answer is true. Second question. What makes carbon footprints difficult to calculate? A, B, C, or D? The answer is D. Carbon footprints are difficult to calculate due to poor knowledge and short data regarding the complex interactions between contributing processes. The last question. Carbon footprint does not include the measurement of other greenhouse gas emissions like methane, nitrous oxide, and hydrofluorocarbons. True or false? The answer is false. Carbon footprint does include the measurement of other greenhouse gas emissions.